Westeros was ripped apart and thousands of people died because Rhaegar Targaryen kidnapped Lyanna Stark. But why the hell did he do it? Was it because of love? Was it because of prophecy? Was it because he's a dumbass? Well, probably like a little bit of everything if we're being totally for real. There's lots of theories that come from the book itself where lots of the different characters have their own like perceptions and theories about Rhaegar and why he did what they did. And then there's like the overall. There's the big boy, the crazy prophetic one, which, you know, I think is the real reason, but we will get to that after we go over what some of the other characters think. Let's get the not fun one out of the way first. We have Robert Baratheon, who thinks that Rhaegar did it because Rhaegar is a monster and he just wanted to essay Lyanna hundreds and hundreds of times, and that's why Robert's so glad he killed him. Woohoo! Now, I think it's fairly safe to say that Robert had a very biased perspective and also just, you know, is kind of an idiot himself, so maybe not the best person to be looking at this logically. So yeah, I don't think there's any indication in the books that that is actually what happened. Then, of course, we have the other main contingent, and that is the love crowd. The people who believe that Rhaegar did it because he just loved Lyanna. That was the person that he fell in love with at the expense of his own wife for any number of reasons, and so he just felt like he had to take her because this was his true love and his true person, and so this was his chance. Barristan Selmy is of this opinion that Rhaegar just happened to love Lyanna. Viserys, his younger brother, also thinks this as well. It's a pretty like commonly held belief amongst, I think, like a large chunk of the characters, which makes sense because, you know, the impetus for this before he kidnaps her, there was the tourney of Harrenhal, where he crowned her the Queen of Love and Beauty, something that he probably should have given to his wife, who was sitting, you know, just a few seats down, but didn't. And so most people see this as, at the very least, some form of infatuation and more likely like love. Then there's the crowd that thinks that Rhaegar was simply unhappy with his wife Elia, and so he was looking for someone else. Because Elia Martell was never in the best of health. She was always kind of like a fragile person. It was very common for her to be sick at all times, and so the belief is that, like, had he had a wife that was a bit more, I don't even know what to say, like in better health, in better spirits, whatever, that he would have been happier. People who think this are typically mostly Lannisters. Kevin Lannister thinks this, as well as Cersei. But what most of these perspectives lack is an understanding of Targaryens and their obsession with prophecy. This, of course, comes from the fact that Targaryens are subject to dragon dreams. They're prophetic dreams that show visions of the future, and unfortunately, a lot of the times, the ones who get them feel it is now their imperative to make them happen, instead of just seeing them as like, oh, this is insight into what's about to happen. So it is heavily speculated that Rhaegar had dragon dreams, that this was, you know, something that he was dealing with, and so he, and in his actions, is responding to what those prophetic visions were. Specifically, Rhaegar seems to have been fixated on the prince who was promised prophecy. That is something that had been known to the Targaryens. Many of them had kind of thought it might be them, or that the prince who was promised was, you know, impending very soon. And Rhaegar was one of them. According to Maester Aemon, who used to correspond with Rhaegar via Raven, Rhaegar for a long time was under the impression that he was the prince who was promised, because he had been born under very sad circumstances. He was born literally as the rest of his family was dying in the burning of Summerhall, which was like one of the Targaryen palaces where a bunch of them died in a very mysterious fire, and he was born literally as it was happening. Like, his parents, you know, Aerys and Rhaella, survived and gave birth to him outside of Summerhall, so he was born amidst salt and smoke because of that tragedy happening, and so he thought prince who was promised. But again, according to Aemon, for whatever reason, he stopped believing that he was the prince who was promised, I'm assuming probably because of a dragon dream, and came to believe that it was actually going to be his children, specifically his son Aegon, because up until this point, the assumption had been that the prince that was promised had to be a boy, because prince, ignoring the translation issues with Valyrian and the word dragon being used for prince and dragon not having a gendered whatever, so yeah, let's not get into that. But Rhaegar seems to have had a very specific interpretation of the prince who was promised prophecy, thinking that the prince who was promised needed to basically include a recreation of the Conqueror, so Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives. Now, that fact specifically we know because of a vision that Dany has in the House of the Undying. Remember, the House of the Undying scene, which happens in season 2 of the show, it's in Clash of Kings in the books. It's very different in the books than it was in the TV show. The TV show really truncates it, makes it tiny and nonsensical, whereas the book, there's lots of Easter eggs and there's lots of insight into the past and the future. Dany is seeing vision after vision. They're all like metaphorical and you kind of have to figure it out, but lots of stuff happens. She sees basically the Red Wedding. She sees it a book early, and the other big thing that she sees is she watches Rhaegar and his wife, Elia Martell, here on the bed in the aftermath of their child, Aegon, being born. No, not the Jon Snow Aegon, because he's not actually Aegon. That's a show. But Rhaegar's actual son, Aegon, who was born of Elia Martell, is born, and Dany watches them talking to each other in this like vision of the past, in which Rhaegar says, "The dragon has 3 heads. There needs to be 1 more." Meaning, at this point, Rhaegar had 2 children. He had Rhaenys, the oldest child, and then Aegon was the second child. And if he's recreating the Conquerors, the dragon with 3 heads, then that would mean he needs a Visenya. He needs 1 more daughter. And an interesting tidbit about this scene is at one point, Rhaegar turns and seems to look Dany in the eye, and it's heavily speculated that he actually does see Dany for a second, but he mistakes her for his Visenya. So if Rhaegar is at the point where he thinks that his son Aegon is the prince who was promised, and to make the prince who was promised successful in, fighting against the darkness, that he needs to recreate the Conquerors, then he needs 1 more child. The only issue is, of course, is that Elia Martell cannot have more children. As I said earlier, Elia Martell had never been in the best of health. Both pregnancies were very, very hard on her, and the last one nearly killed her. So if she tried to have a child again, she would very likely die and probably take the child along with her. And so Rhaegar is now in a pickle, because if he thinks that this is absolutely necessary because the dragon has to have 3 heads, then what does he do? He needs to figure out a way to get a 3rd child, to get his Visenya to complete the Conquerors. Also, before someone asks, I know that they're like out of order because Rhaenys was actually the youngest and Visenya would have been the oldest in the original trio. I have heard the theory, I don't remember where I heard it, that basically he's like, the idea is that they're like coming back into the world in the opposite order of when they died, because Rhaenys died first, so she's reborn first, and then Aegon second, then Visenya last. I don't know. Do with that what you will. But the point is that Rhaegar is in a pickle until he meets Lyanna Stark. He meets Lyanna Stark at the tourney of Harrenhal, where he crowns her the Queen of Love and Beauty, possibly in the aftermath of finding her as the Knight of the Laughing Tree. I did a whole video on that a little earlier. You can go watch that for more information on that. But the idea is, in the midst of him needing to figure out how to get another child, he meets a woman that he possibly does fall in love with. And so the combination of these 2 things, his like genuine like admiration and possible like falling in love with this person, combined with the fact that he needs to make a kid, leads him to, while possibly not kidnap Lyanna, at the very least like ask her like, hey, are you willing to like go off with me? It's kind of important that we do. And that's where I personally land on this. I do think that it was a combination of the 2 things. I think that Rhaegar, unfortunately, was meddling with fate a little too much, because remember, don't fuck with prophecy, because it's probably going to cause issues. And so his getting with Lyanna, while I think was probably generally on the up and up, was, in an attempt to manipulate fate so that he could bring forward the prince who was promised in the way that he thought it needed to be. But of course, as we know, meddling with fate led to everything going wrong. He didn't actually get his Visenya. He got another child, probably John, but I don't want to say it because people get weird on the internet. And then everyone basically died. Lyanna died, he died, his wife Elia died, and his 2 children died. All because Rhaegar forgot the big rule about prophecies: you can't consciously try to force it to happen. It has to naturally occur. And so the prince who was promised isn't going to be forced into the world. They are going to fulfill the requirements naturally, as Daenerys does at the end of the first book of Game of Thrones. Thanks, y'all. Bye.